Hey, it's State of State. We got your Nittany Lion update. It's a football discussion with Tom and Justin, so kick back and press play.
With former Penn State and NFL defensive back Justin King, I'm Tom Hannafin. This is State of State. This podcast is presented by BetOnline. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. BetOnline is every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. Think you know your stuff? Get in on BetOnline's $200,000 mega contest and pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200,000. When the games are over, head to the online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker or unwind with one of over 150 slots games. Head to betonline.ag today to get in on the action. State of State is presented by BetOnline. The game starts here. State of State is proud to partner with Illumination Brewing for another season of crafting State IPA, the perfect tailgate and game day beer for Penn State football fans. State IPA is available now at your local beer distributor, grocery store, plus select bars and restaurants. Visit illuminationbrewing.com/beer/state-IPA to learn more. Must be 21 years or older to purchase. Please drink responsibly. Also, State of State is a proud supporter of Blue White Outfitters. Blue White Outfitters was created as a retail shop meant to highlight the confidence, competitiveness, and fearlessness of the elite athletes found throughout the history of Penn State University. Check out their Lockdown U and Lawn Boys merchandise today, and keep an eye out for State of State apparel coming soon. All sales from Blue White Outfitters directly benefit Penn State student athletes. Visit www.bluewhiteoutfitters.com today. Hi, everyone. Welcome to State of State. Happy Saturday. I'm Tom Hannafin. I'm joined by Joe DeLeone from within the Believe Podcast Network from the Ruffino Joe Show. They do an outstanding broadcast. You've got to check it out. They're fantastic when it comes to covering college football. Today, we're talking about Penn State's place and standing in the world of college football thus far in the 2024 season. The Nittany Lions have a bye this week. There's plenty of action going on today. But it's good to take a step back and understand what this team is from a national perspective, because we can be very biased as Penn State fans. I think that's very natural. So like, comment, subscribe, rate us, turn on notifications, get at us on social media at State of State Pod, get at us in our comment section on YouTube. And don't forget, you can sign up now and become a member of our YouTube channel and get all upcoming episodes of State of State ad-free for just 99 cents a month. You can hit the join button on our YouTube channel, and you can also hit the link in the description of this podcast. Joe, for all of us as Penn State fans, 2-0 going into this weekend, bye week, you're number 8 in the country. Things feel good, but not great. A little Jekyll and Hyde situation between the West Virginia win and the Bowling Green win. From the macro perspective, how do you feel about the Nittany Lions?
Well, I think that there is naturally going to be an overreaction to a performance like that. We're seeing the same thing happen with Alabama, how they played for 3 quarters very poorly against USF. And a lot of people are acting as though Wisconsin's going to play them close. I don't think that's going to be the case this weekend. But for Penn State, having seen that game and watching it, there's certainly negatives for Penn State that need to be worked on. The way that Harold Fannin was able to have the success that he did, who's Bowling Green's top tight end and effectively top pass catcher. A lot of easy catches that should have been won in contested situations by Penn State secondary. That was one of the issues that I was kind of wondering for Penn State going into this year, is how effectively can you replace the 3 guys that you just put out into the NFL? But I'm not super worried. Drew Aller didn't play as good as you would have hoped, throwing an interception and not eclipsing 250 passing yards. But I feel like we've seen from him just a real progression that's going to help them down the line and later on in the year. It feels like he's a lot more natural. Feels like he's a lot more confident in his abilities. He's aggressive. He's ripping it downfield. A lot of that stuff we didn't really get to see as much last season. And overall, Kotelnicki, the way that he is improving this offense, and it feels like the run game and Singleton are playing at such a high level, those things are going to pay dividends later on in the year. I chalk this up to using all your energy into trying to smoke West Virginia, which you did very successfully, and then just coming back hungover against what's a moderately feisty Bowling Green team.
Yeah, and now looking at what Bowling Green is, a lot of projections for them to possibly win the MAC. I think it's a very easy projection to make. Connor Bazelak, in my opinion, will be playing on an NFL roster at some point. Same thing with Harold Fannin. They had a handful of guys, I think, that have pro potential. Penn State, it felt like to me, yes, it was a bit of a hangover. It was going into a home game. We should beat these guys, maybe underestimating them a little bit. I actually disagree with you in terms of Drew Aller, and I get it, we're biased, but the statistics, I don't think, tell the whole story in that that was an opportunity to come from behind and overcoming some adversity. I know Penn State fans are going to say, we shouldn't have faced any adversity against Bowling Green. Well, you did. And as much as Drew Aller was under duress and pressured a lot in this game, and that's on the offensive line and the pass protection, he endured. I would have seen instances last season in his first full year as a starter where he might have gotten a little bit rattled. And I didn't see that. He was a big reason why Penn State slowly came from behind and ultimately won the game. But what was interesting to me was Trey Wallace was relatively taken away by Bowling Green. It wasn't his inactivity. There were a couple of passes that could have were knocked away or called back, something like that. But Tyler Warren goes off in historic fashion. Nick Singleton goes over 100 yards yet again. Katron Allen goes over 100 yards for the first time this season. To me, the way that I watch this offense develop here, Joe, is Kotelnicki is reminding me a lot of some of the Chip Kelly Oregon offenses. In that, yes, I understand people want to see Drew Aller put up video game numbers, as you said, 250 yards passing, touchdowns through the air, certainly capable of that. But the ground game and the diversity of pre-snap motion, the diversity in the passing game, the balance is really what's impressive. What do you think about that comp to Oregon of, what would that be, the 2000s, 2010s, somewhere in there?
Yeah, early 2010s. And the one thing that we remember from those Oregon teams is that diversity and the usage of multiple running backs with different skill sets. And that's what we see now with Katron Allen and Nick Singleton, is that knowing how to activate these guys to play to their specific roles. One of the things that I know that Singleton had, I believe he had the most carries last year, but it felt like he wasn't being set up to succeed the way that we know that he could. He's a home run threat. He's got a big frame and he's a pretty thick kid, but he is give him a little bit of space and he's going to turn it into a touchdown. Back-to-back games where he's made some huge rushing plays. That's where I think that this Penn State team is going to be the most dangerous, is that the rushing attack is ultimately opening up way more for this offense, that they can utilize both backs in multiple ways. I also do, to your point about Aller and what he did, 100% agree with that. I brought that up on one of the spots that I did yesterday, is that I saw Aller come back and step up to the plate and lead his team on a drive when it felt like the rest of the team was kind of asleep. That's something that a team like Notre Dame needed from their starting quarterback. When they got upset, they needed Riley Leonard to step up to the plate and manufacture a drive in order to help them win the game. And Drew Aller was able to do that. It's adversity that you don't want to see, but it's adversity that you're experiencing that's only going to help him later on in the season and if they end up in the playoff.
What is your opinion of Tyler Warren? Because amongst the Penn State coaching staff, and now I guess amongst Penn State fans, there's the phrase being thrown out there that Tyler Warren is the most complete tight end in America. I'm inclined to agree with that. I'm scratching my head to come up with a tight end that is more complete. Do you have an opinion on that?
Colson Loveland's not as good of a blocker, who's Michigan's tight end. Benjamin Urasek and the group of guys that they have at Georgia, again, not as good of blockers. Jake Brenningstool at Clemson's maybe the only one who might contest Warren, but that was my thoughts on him just as a draft prospect, is that I thought there was a very tangible well-roundedness. Even when you looked at Theo Johnson last year, you didn't get the same level of impact as a blocker. I just think that Tyler Warren always shined to me as just the better football player, the guy that on a snap-to-snap basis, you noticed his impact, and he was a big reason why Penn State was able to get back into that game against Bowling Green. I really like Tyler Warren. I think he is going to be among the top 5 tight ends in this upcoming class for the 2025 NFL draft because of what we're talking about here. He's a strong blocker. He shows tremendous intent to block, which is kind of hard to come by for tight ends these days. Strong route runner too, and he's got some pretty good hands. His impact continues to show. It just, would be great if Penn State could incorporate some more of their receivers outside of Warren.
Yeah, Trey Wallace, big game against West Virginia, taken out of the entire situation, it felt like, against Bowling Green. Liam Clifford has yet to record a catch. Julian Fleming, the transfer from Ohio State, had his first catch of the season for 3 yards against Bowling Green. So far, everybody's kind of scratching their heads waiting to see why Penn State went and got this guy in the transfer portal. So that remains to be seen. You're talking earlier about some of the players Penn State sent to the NFL from the defensive backs. Offensive line, kind of a similar story, and some of the issues that were concerns for Penn State fans during the offseason, pass protection, especially the tackles, losing Olu Fashanu and Caden Wallace, that was illuminated against Bowling Green. Would you be deeply worried about that, considering the opponents Penn State has left?
That's the second fear that I had coming into this year for Penn State. It was easy to project them as a possible playoff team because the schedule's super favorable. It's the most favorable it's ever been, because you're not having to play both Ohio State and Michigan this year, if I'm correct. I don't know why I'm
just Ohio State,
okay,
no Michigan this year. You do go to USC, you host Washington, you're at Wisconsin, you host Illinois, so some speed bumps there.
Right, and not having to play both those, that's the biggest help here for Penn State. But what had really been a concern was losing both your tackles and also losing Hunter Norzad at center. It does feel like I don't really know who that best offensive lineman is. It always felt as though Penn State always had like a blue chipper, a premier guy. And when you had Fashanu, who was your anchor at left tackle, that really elevated the group. But I don't know who that is. I don't know if Penn State necessarily needs somebody to emerge as a top 100 draft pick in the upcoming class or in the future. But when you look at all these teams that you're facing off with, or the other teams that you're competing with in the Big Ten, Ohio State has a top offensive line in the country. Oregon is working through some kinks, but still has two of the best tackles in the country. And USC's offensive line has been playing tremendously well. If they have to go up against teams that have stout defensive lines, they could end up getting really, really slowed down because of this lack of just offensive line identity we're seeing.
You mentioned Oregon. I certainly want to talk about Penn State's standing within all of college football, specifically the top 15. But let's start within the Big Ten. From what you've seen from Oregon and Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan, the teams that you kind of expect to be in that top four, a lot of confidence has been taken away from Michigan after the shellacking they just suffered against Texas. Oregon, kind of a shaky start against Idaho. Ohio State has looked like Ohio State. In your opinion, who winds up in the Big Ten title game, projecting out as best you can at this point in the year?
Right now, the two that I feel the most confident in, Ohio State has firmly sat atop of that list. They had all the offseason hype. They had the most premier roster. They did what Michigan did last year, where they brought back as many of their upperclassmen, especially on defense, as possible. Most of their offensive line came back. And we're starting to see the result of the senior leadership. They haven't played anybody. They haven't exactly been tested with the first two games of the year so far. You know, you beat up on Akron. What do you really take away from that? But what's impressive is how Will Howard already feels like he's been there for 2 seasons. And Jeremiah Smith has been unreal, who's a true freshman for them. I don't think that Jeremiah Smith is like important for their success this year in 2024, but I think it's a testament to how good the group is, and then his ability to emerge as one of the better ones of the group. It's only going to divert attention away from, Carnell Tate to have a big game down the line, for Emeka Ibuka to have a big game down the line. Having a true freshman who's drawing attention is going to be a serious plus for them. But outside of that, I feel like we don't have much of an answer. Right now, I lean USC. I think that USC is reminding us of what happens when Lincoln Riley has all the weapons and the pieces that he has to work with. Zachariah Branch has been a lightning bolt for them, and I think it's going to be really hard to keep up with that offense. But I've been shocked by how D'Anton Lynn has transformed this defense as quickly as he has. He was one of my favorite defensive coordinators coming into this season, and I thought it was going to be a difficult reconstruction trying to get these guys to tackle at the level that they needed. And we saw against LSU, they're not allowing anything after the catch, after first contact. They are bringing guys down immediately, and they're coming downhill hard. That defensive line looks phenomenal. Right now, USC feels to be the second best team, and I think Penn State's close behind if they can move on from that bad Bowling Green game and start to stack some top-tier performances.
Penn State on a bye this week, Kent State next week, and then your first Big Ten game is at home, but it's against Illinois, and Illinois has looked good to start the year. Do you believe in the Fighting Illini yet?
I'm not going to jump in on the Fighting Illini because they burned me pretty bad last year. I thought they were going to be my Big Ten sleeper, and they were pretty rough offensively. We saw against Kansas, though, that Bielema is just a really strong influencer, the offensive line play, and then just being super hard-nosed on defense. I don't know if I can really trust Luke Altmaier. I think that's where the separation comes in a matchup like this. Illinois is always going to be a tough out under Bielema, but I think that Penn State's got a pretty clear separation there, and they should be able to win that game.
Looking within the top 15 of college football, because now that's really what we have to focus on, even call it the top 20 with the 12-team college football playoff. So much can happen between now and December. To me, it feels like Penn State still looks like one of the top 10 teams in the country and should, barring something catastrophic, find their way into the college football playoff. Do you see more than 2 losses on their schedule that could sink that hope?
I think even if they do suffer 2 losses, it's not going to sink any hope for them to get into the playoff. It's actually, Penn State has always had this benefit, or not benefit, rather, they've always had this curse of the 2 losses that they would suffer would bump them out of the playoff conversation. But now being 10-2 and then not having to play in the Big Ten championship game theoretically in those past years would have gotten them a spot in the playoffs. So if they end up going 10-2 and they end up dropping USC and Ohio State, those are going to be really quality losses. That's the world that we now live in the expanded playoff, is the definition of a quality loss. It used to be, what were the premier wins? What were the signature moments that you had in the season? Are you 11-1? Are you undefeated? And anything outside of that was going to be a stretch of getting in. But now the argument's to be made of 9-3, 10-2 teams. How good are your losses? It's really to Penn State's benefit that if they are 10-2 and they blow past the rest of their opponents, one of the teams that could be 11-1 is a Notre Dame team that has a loss to NIU on their resume. So I think that Penn State is going to have a really, really strong resume when that conversation and that time has to come, that they can be the 10 or the 11 seed.
Whose bubble do you think could burst within the top 10 before play gets underway today? Just for the record, 10 is Miami, 9 is Oregon, 8 is Penn State, 7 is Tennessee, 6 is Mizzou, 5 is Ole Miss, 4 is Alabama, who's visiting Wisconsin today, Ohio State at 3, Texas at 2, Georgia at 1.
The one that feels the most likely, I'm not super confident in this pick because I think that Mizzou is a really good team, but they've got a little bit of a tough schedule. And I think it's really going to come down to the matchup that they have with Alabama. That's a really important head-to-head that they need to win. And I think that Alabama is the better team between the two of them. They are another program that has had a really easy opening stretch. They get to play Boston College in week 3, which will help us determine what are they defensively. They're another program that put out a ton of guys to the NFL on defense, and they lost their defensive coordinator, Blake Baker. We have no idea if this defense is as good as it was last year. That was what they leaned on. That was an anchor for them, is that if the offense was maybe not as explosive and Brady Cook and Luther Burden weren't connecting as much as possible, that they could rely on their defense to make plays and to get stops. So I think that Mizzou is the one to pay attention to, because their defense is not on fraud watch, but has not given me any confidence because of who they've played.
It's so funny how in the last 10 years, everybody would give flack to the Big 12 for just playing no defense and tons of points. And I was like, that's basically what the SEC is now. The Big 12 is unrecognizable because of conference realignment. But the SEC, the way Alabama allowed USF to hang around for 3.5 quarters was surprising. I believe they can get that corrected. Tennessee with Nico looks like they're going to only get better as the season goes on. Ole Miss just looks like firepower galore. Georgia looks like freaking Georgia. but man, there's not a ton of defense being played in that league.
And to talk about the SEC, the way that these teams are playing in the first couple of weeks, like I really don't know who's after Georgia. Like I feel like that there's such a debate on who files up next because, you mentioned how Alabama kind of struggled a little bit, but then they turned it on late, and Wisconsin might be the opportunity for them to like really say like, hey, we're much more legit than we looked against South Florida. You mentioned Tennessee. That team is unbelievable the way that they were able to demolish NC State, and Nico is so perfect for that offense. Ole Miss also even brings up this question of they need to be tested first, but was their portal haul what was needed for them to take themselves over the top defensively? The SEC, Texas also, even the way that they played against Michigan, there are just no clear answer. I think all those teams are just conglomerating into this one bucket where they're all really good, and it's going to probably just come down to a couple of plays when they face off with one another.
College football is just one big melting pot. It's just beautiful. You mentioned Wisconsin because they host Alabama today, and I'm going to be focusing on that because Penn State's first road test in the Big Ten is going to be at Wisconsin in October, then a bye week, then at USC. So that's going to be an interesting 3-week stint. I don't know if I'm buying the Wisconsin hype. It's an air raid offense under that offensive coordinator, but it's Tyler Van Dyke playing quarterback, and it feels like a car with 3 wheels. I just don't get it.
It's so funny to consider that it's technically an air raid, but nothing that they've done has really screamed air raid to me when they haven't played
with
anybody.
Mordecai last year, I could buy it because he'd done that at SMU, but I'm like, Tyler Van Dyke was... I would just call him inconsistent, everything that he did at Miami.
Well, I was always critical of Van Dyke and for the longest time until he really started to struggle last year. I had a lot of Miami fans that hated me, and now they all love me because I've hyped up Cam Ward a ton. But the thing that's hurt me with Van Dyke and what his biggest issue is, and what we're seeing in the first 2 weeks, he's just so hesitant. He's not aggressive. His yards per attempt, he's probably got one of the worst yards per attempt. I don't know off the top of my head, but in the country, the way that he's played against Western Michigan and South Dakota, he just doesn't attack. He can do it. He's got the arm to do it. He's kind of like the college football version of Daniel Jones, where he's got the tools. He could do it. He just chooses not to for some reason. Something just doesn't click for him, and maybe he's better off working at Chase or something like that, but not to despair, because Daniel Jones should be not working.
Daniel Jones is catching strays on podcasts that have nothing to do with him.
He deserves it. As a Giants fan, he absolutely deserves it. But to be not to be too disparaging to Tyler Van Dyke, I think what's going to hurt them is any situation where they're going up against an offense that's potent, that can throw points up on the board in an instant. They don't operate with speed. They don't operate with splash plays and an ability to just like, all right, we need a touchdown. We need it in a minute and we need some momentum now. They don't have that. They're extremely sluggish with a good defense. So to that point, I don't really think there's any Wisconsin hype. I feel like a team like Nebraska, I'd pick Nebraska before I would pick Wisconsin.
I agree with you on that. This is an interesting day for the Big Ten. Notre Dame is at Purdue. You have Oregon versus Oregon State in Corvallis. I'm always going to call it the Civil War. I I can't get rid of it. And then Michigan's going to be hosting Arkansas State, trying to bounce back, and a couple other games across the Big Ten that I think are going to be interesting. Nebraska hosting Northern Iowa. So there's some games that are going to play out today that I think could have some effects here early in September, but I feel confident about where Penn State is at this point in time. It feels like they're going to make the necessary changes. It's just a matter of keeping up, because every single week, and I think we learned that lesson with Florida State and then Notre Dame, is that the stakes are so much higher because the net has been cast so much wider. It's amazing. You can lose your entire possibility for the season in September. And there were instances where, how many years did we talk about, oh, you can lose in week 1, but you just can't lose in November. Now it's like, nope, you can screw it up real early.
And especially if you falter in the opportunities that you have to build momentum. Like, that's the biggest thing for me with a lot of these teams, is that, like, Florida State comes out flat, and, you could have bounced back against Georgia Tech. You absolutely could have, and found yourself in the ACC conversation, won the ACC, and gone on to the playoff. But when you're playing as consistently flat as these teams like Notre Dame also as well, it does feel like there's a huge balloon that pops. Just all the air is let out of those situations. And you really need to be as downhill as possible with these programs. And what does help, though, for a lot of these teams that in the past were getting 2 losses and then kind of catching their momentum late, that wider net does open up more opportunities and more chances to make the playoff. But you better hope you have a good resume. You better hope the teams that you were playing against have good wins as well. It is going to be, I think, just such a wide, complex debate when we start talking about who deserves to get in that 8, 9, 10, and 11 spot outside of the G5 teams.
We'll see where Penn State falls in all of that. Joe, thank you so much for joining me. As always, coming back on here, we appreciate it every single time. Thank you for the national perspective. Check out Joe DeLeone on the Ruffino and Joe Show, wherever you get your podcasts. Like, comment, subscribe, and rate this podcast wherever you get your podcast. Check us out on social media at State of State Pod. Comment in our YouTube channel, and don't forget, you can become a member of our YouTube channel now for just 99 cents a month and get all upcoming episodes of State of State ad-free. You can hit the join button on our homepage, or you can follow the link in the description of this podcast. Joe, thank you very much, and everybody watching and listening, enjoy the day of college football. Thank you all so much for joining us. This episode and our entire library of shows is available now on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Also, let us know what you think of the show on social media, and check out all of our content on X, Instagram, and TikTok. Search for the handle at State of State Pod. State of State is presented by Bet Online and by Blue White Outfitters.